Hey there. So today I'm going to be talking about Night Raid 1931. It was actually a pretty fun anime, and before I started filming this or whatever, I was kind of debating to myself, should I go in order of anime I've seen because I'm quite a bit backlogged right now, or should I talk more about something I think is better? And it was between this and what was it, Dusk Maiden of Amnesia, and it was like, well, I don't know, which one should I talk about? And it was like, well, I'd much rather talk about the anime that kind of pushes anime forward, or at least try something a little bit different, than, just a kind of standard sort of, guy and girl want each other anime, but they can't express their feelings verbally, so they just have to have these awkward pauses where they feel sad and give sad faces. So, it's like, alright, I'm gonna go with Night Raid. So anyway, Night Raid. It's basically the X-Men as spies. That's pretty much it, specifically, Japanese spies in China during 1931. I think it actually starts off in 1926. I may be wrong about that, because I believe, I don't even know why they chose 1931. I guess that's when the bulk of the story starts. But I mean, in terms of timeline, I believe it goes from 26 to 1936 or whatever. But that's with the extra episode, so I guess it really does take place in 1931, at least the bulk of it, which kind of makes you wonder what were they doing for those 4 years or so. But anyway, moving on. So I'm not that quite familiar with Japanese and Chinese history, in the 1930s. Like, yeah, I know there was World War II and the Japanese were invading, but in terms of the intricacies of, I don't know it as well as perhaps I know the Battle of the Bulge in Europe. So, and that's mostly due to me having a Eurocentric education. But with that said, it was very nice because it was also kind of bad in a way because I didn't know where fiction started and reality began. So that was kind of a problem for me. But it did a pretty nice job, at least in terms of its own story of not bending reality too much. I mean, really, I actually kind of question whether or not they even needed to be superpowers. But then if you take away superpowers, then you have to ask the question of why are the main characters the spies? And that was kind of a problem for me overall, is what is the motivation of the characters? Like, alright, so there's this girl named Yukina, and she's introduced in the first episode, or the 00 episode, as the protagonist, in a sense. But she's very much not the protagonist. She's just kind of there. It's later established that the reason why she's doing this is to find her brother, who later on turns out to be the antagonist of sorts. And so she has a sidekick or a butler named Natsune, and it's very unclear what are their motivations for doing this. Okay, take her brother out of the equation, because at first they didn't even know her brother was the antagonist. It could have been anyone. It's just that she was searching for her brother, and they were like, well, if you come work with us, we'll help you find your brother. And so it was just kind of like that sort of thing of, why did she join, in the first place? Okay, so there's the vague promise of helping her find her brother, but why is she a Japanese spy? This is my problem with the main anime, is they're all spies, but yet they're not really nationalistic in any sort of way. In fact, they're almost very cynical, and it's just alright, so there's cynical people doing these cynical things, but why? That's the thing that remains unanswered, and it's never even questioned really, but you're just why are they doing these things? So anyway, the basic plot is, Yukina's brother is the antagonist, and he discovers the atomic bomb, 10 years or 15 years ahead of time. And so, alright, that's fine. That's basically, the plot is basically the villain gets future technology that's, maybe 10 years ahead of its time. And that's about it. But here's one problem I have. So they set off the bomb in Manchuria, just as a demonstration. I think it was in the desert, or at least something like that. I don't know if there are deserts in Manchuria. I mean, I believe there are because it's right next to Mongolia. But there's the problem of radioactive waste, unless, there's no problem with that, I guess. I don't know. It was just, very questionable in that I didn't quite understand it. And granted, it wasn't one of those things you're supposed to be questioning. The point of the bomb going off was really more of a demonstration to the side characters. And so that was pretty much it. Anyway, so as you may have noticed earlier, I said that it's basically X-Men as spies. But yeah, I haven't really mentioned how they've used their powers yet. And as I said earlier, they really didn't need to have powers. One of them can push things with his mind, telekinesis. There has teleportation. Another has clairvoyance, or being able to see things, like around corners or through walls. And the other, it has telepathy. And apparently they can only use them for time periods. It's never really discussed, like, oh, you can only use it for 1 minute. Like, I believe in the first episode they say, the telekinesis guy can only use his powers for an hour. But then there's like a time where he uses them and he's only allowed to use them for a minute. So they never really discuss, what's the time limit on their powers. So that was one kind of mini problem I had. But really, the biggest problem is just, what are the motivations of these characters for working for the Japanese government? Because, so as I said earlier, Yukina, she is on the search for her brother, and she basically joins the Japanese, spy service to search for her brother. And there's this other guy named Kazura, who is a teleporter. And Kazura actually ends up joining her brother. He switches sides, and they basically do. He just switches sides, and then later on he switches back to the protagonist team. But all right, so when he joined, what was stopping Yukina from joining? That's never really mentioned. Like, what are her loyalties to Japan? Because alright, so the basic plot is the reason why they're, using the bomb, or why they made the bomb, is it's basically a military tool to help them liberate Asia from the European colonies, and, possibly to unite them as a single country. And it's like, okay, so are they trying to liberate Asia, as colonial Asia, or are they trying to unite it as a country? Like, they never really establish which one they're going for. In the later episodes, when it's first introduced, they say they want it to be a singular country. Then in later episodes, it's just, let's free the colonies. And it's like, okay, but isn't Japan, conquering nations at this time? In fact, one of the plot points is, Japan creating the Manchu state, or Manchuria as its own country. It was kind of unclear in terms of what happened. I believe it was its own country. It's just it had very close ties to Japan. At least that's the way it was kind of introduced to me as a foreigner. So it was very nice, though, at least in the anime, of how it wasn't really whitewashing history. It did seem to acknowledge the problems that Japan has done. It didn't go to an extreme length of apology or even detail. But I mean, just acknowledging that it invaded countries is kind of enough, or at least a big step. So that was, nice, I guess. I don't know. So that goes on, and yeah, it's kind of like whatever. But anyway, as I said, so why didn't she join her brother when Kazura joined him? Like, what's stopping her? Because it doesn't. They never say things like, oh, Japan is a great country trying to help people. Like, that's never really uttered at all. So, now that I mentioned that, what is it? The plan is to liberate Asian colonies from Europe, I think it's time to talk about at least the main kind of climax of the story, which is they put a atomic bomb on a plane, and it's heading for Shanghai. And basically the plot is, if you don't liberate your colonies, or your Asian colonies, by the time, the plane gets to Shanghai, we're going to set off the bomb. But that makes no sense at all. That's like saying, we're going to unite North America, and if they don't do it by midnight, we're going to bomb New York. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense at all. It's basically, if you don't let me break the law, I'm going to chop off my arm. Like, that's basically the plot. And it's like, what? That makes no sense, you know? It's just hurting yourself instead of completing your goals. And so that's really the kind of, that's one of the problems. As I said, it's not a bad anime overall. It's just, it has some problems and there's some things that just don't quite fit. And you're just like, why is he doing this and why is that happening and blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, the main character, which I haven't even mentioned yet. So as I said earlier, these characters don't even need to be in the plot. Like, it seems like it's almost a kind of, not really self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's more of a, they thought of what they wanted and then they thought of things that would be cool in it. Like, all right, let's do spies in China in 1931. Okay, what's next? We'll have them have superpowers. Okay, what's next? Characters, I guess? All right, what's next? Motivations, just this sort of like, this was the original idea and then they had to add on things to it. And as those things kind of came across the greater whole, they kind of got stretched out into this kind of vague, ambiguous meaning of why they are there and why they even exist, as opposed to the center core. So that was kind of a problem in my opinion. But yeah, overall, it's not a bad anime. It's quite enjoyable and things like that, but, it just has these questions of where if you question it, it doesn't make sense at all. I'm going to end it with, like, the final episode, or the OVA episode, which is basically Kazura joining the, the February 26th rebellion, or the attempted coup, and it kind of points out all of my problems, where in the episode, he's introduced, or not introduced, but he's talked to by some Japanese spies, and he's running a photo shop, because in China they ran a photo shop, and so the basic plot is that they want him to be a spy again and find out if there's going to be a coup and why and all these things. And, they actually introduce him like, they say like, hey, you dropped this or whatever, and, he really didn't drop it, but they just threw a book at his feet, and it was like, the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. And, at first I thought that meant like, oh, he's become a communist, or he's been reading about communism and the ideas appeal to him. But then I was thinking about it, like, well, what if it's even better than that? What if it's just, they just threw a random book at him and it just happened to be, a piece of illegal literature? Like, that would be almost better. But they never clarify one way or the other. He's just like, oh, you're going to try to play dirty tricks, huh? And, yeah, it's just like, whatever. So he could or could not be a communist. They never really state one way or the other. It's just that he has rebelled or, joined the enemy before, and so he joined again. One problem I have to say is, alright, so it's acknowledged that the people, or, that they've been looked after, after the events of the main plot, but it never really, says why they chose to speak to them or anything like that. Like, why did they pick them specifically? Like, because Kazura specifically, he really dislikes using his powers because he finds it dishonorable. But, so why would you choose a guy to be a spy who doesn't like using his powers and has been known to rebel against you? I mean, and even better, what if he really is a communist? Like, these kinds of things of, a guy who does not sympathize with you, doesn't like using his powers, which is the reason why you chose him, and, has turned against you before. Just all these problems. Why him? And then, of course, there's the problem of, well, the real reason why is because the writer wanted it that way. And so you see, that's the thing, is when you can see through those artificial barriers as to why they chose certain things, that's when things get horrible. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I guess I'll spoil the last little thing. Natsune, the butler to Yukina, he dies in the second to last episode. He's like, don't tell Yukina. And it's kind of like, well, alright, okay, whatever, I guess. You know, what does it matter to him? And you know, it's like if you had to choose one of those four main characters of who to die, it probably would be the guy who talks the least, which is Natsume, because he's very uncharismatic. You know, he's just a big, tall guy who can see through walls. You know, he doesn't really do anything necessarily. Like, he's used occasionally, but really, overall, like, none of them needed to have superpowers. You know, all you needed, I think it actually would have been better if they were all these ultra nationalistic people who sort of become jaded along the way. Instead, they're just introduced as jaded and, you know, with their own sort of reasons for doing what they do. And then they just go their separate ways at the end. And that's it. I don't know. So, what did you think of it? Did you like it? Hate it? You know, do you think it could have been better? What do you think would have even made it better? I mean, you know, what did you like about it? So anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Please post a comment or, you know, just say what you thought. Anyway, later.